Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Compliance and Visibility, the Insurance Power Couple. My name is James Campbell, and I'm the Senior Manager of Industry Relations with NAA. I want to welcome all of our members in attendance. Thank you for joining us for this important topic. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. First, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our website and YouTube channel next week. You may then share this presentation with those colleagues and friends who are unable to attend at present. Second, we have allotted time at the end of today's presentation for live questions and answers. You may type your questions into the Q&A or chat boxes on your screen, and we will share them with our presenters. Third, a brief disclaimer that the information provided in this presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information provided is for general information purposes only. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our presenter, or today's host rather, Terry Danner, CEO of SightPlan, who will in turn introduce himself and his fellow speakers. Terry?
Thank you, James. We appreciate it. I'll start with the speakers first. So Jen, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Robbie, and I'll finish it off.
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I am Jen Berube, Senior Casualty Specialist with Sampo International Global Risk Solutions. I work in our risk control department, consulting with insureds on how to mitigate risk across all lines of insurance coverage. And I am a certified safety professional working in the insurance industry for the last 20 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robbie Parker. I am the Director of Facilities for BH Management. I've been in the industry for a little over 35 years, and I'm just glad to be here today.
So Robbie, we both got some long tenure in the industry. So Terry Danner here, as James mentioned, CEO of SightPlan, but today I'm going to put on my operator's hat. Like Robbie, I've been in the industry a long time, since the late 1980s. Most of that time with Trammell Crow, Riverstone Residential Group, and all in property operations. So hopefully what I provide today is a little bit more insight from an operations perspective, although we'll talk a little bit about the things that we're doing today to ensure compliance and visibility, the insurance power couple that we're going to talk about. And so why don't we dive right in? We'll talk about the topic first. If we go to the next slide. Thank you, James. So this session is called Compliance and Visibility, the Insurance Power Couple. Let's start by breaking down those two terms, if we would. Compliance first, because we need to know what we're complying with. Obviously, NAA and the NAA affiliates are great resources to assist with that through Click and Comply and other available resources, but also management companies are doing what they can to stay abreast of what they need to comply with, a lot of which is involved really at the local level. So property managers, maintenance directors, regional managers, and we'll talk about that. They need to be working collectively as a team to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. A lot of organizations have their own inspection templates. And then there's actually complying with them, right? Whatever them is. And then, of course, there's the visibility part, right? How can you get comfortable that what you think is getting done is actually getting done? All of this is not getting any easier with the increasing complexity we've got with our assets, changes in the laws, and an environment with both increasing turnover and a shortage of qualified talent, which I know everyone who is listening is probably experiencing that from an operational perspective. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what operators actually want from technology. Then we'll talk about the ROI and how it expresses itself in many ways. And then wrap it up talking about how can the technology actually help to reduce insurance costs. So we'll take those one at a time. And then, as James mentioned, at the end, we'll open it up for questions. So if we advance to the next slide, let's talk about what operators actually want from technology. And there's obviously been a lot of investment in proptech recently. So Robbie, why don't we start with you? Talk about what you're actually seeing out there and what operators, those in the field in particular, really want from technology.
Well, I've seen technology transpire over many years, and I think what we're really looking for is to put something in the hands of our maintenance team that makes their job simple and easier. Technology's come a long way. I always revert back to, technology being like a manifold gauge for HVAC system. You can't troubleshoot a system without those gauges. And in today's world, as a service team member, you have to be able to navigate technology in order to be more efficient. So it's just become another kind of tool in their tool bag, if you would. And we've adopted it really, really well. But the goal is to make sure and keep it simple. I find that if we get too advanced and throw too much out there, it gets convoluted and stuff. So our goal is to try and keep it very simple, so it's easy to manage and it gets done.
So what does simple mean? If you think about some of the things that you've implemented, you can have these long compliance checklists, right? How are the teams reacting to those types of tools? Or if not those, what do they actually want?
That's a great question, Terry. So we did go down that road. And I'll use an example. We rolled out an extensive exterior condenser PM program. Consisted of about 15 points, including taking pictures just to verify things. And that was all well and good, and it was great. But then we have to take a step back and say, what is the true meaning of this inspection or this preventative maintenance, and try and bring it down to just a few key points. So for that instance, for an exterior condenser PM program, the number one reason we do that is so that we don't get those emergency calls in the summertime for a pan overflowing or whatever that may be. So if we can go in and do a filter change and install, what we call slime tabs or whatever to keep that condensate down, that's the two main things that we need to do. So let's start and take a step back. Let's simplify the need to make sure that the outcome is the same or better. So we had to take a step back, kind of simplify things. Plus, too, from a user standpoint, it's much easier. There's two checkpoints. It tells me exactly what I need to do, and I can get it done and move on. So we did have to take a step back and make it just a little bit simpler.
It's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? I mean, where are those big risks? Let's spend our time, focused on those. And you also bring up a good point about the implementation, right, and ease of use, particularly, as I mentioned, in an environment where there's a lot of turnover and whatnot, things have to be very intuitive. So yes, keep it simple. I'll leave off the last S there in KISS, but you've got that piece, but then you've also got, the ease of adaptation of the product, right? How do you train it? And the other point, which I think was key that you mentioned, is one more tool in their tool belt, right? Which is a smartphone today. Obviously, a lot of, I think what we're going to be talking about today really can't occur unless your team members are really operating in a mobile environment, right? Which is hopefully the next transition, if it's not already kind of, in a full transition within our industry.
Gary,
go ahead, Jen.
if I can add from a risk mitigation standpoint in the perspective that I see what operators are looking for, I echo what Robbie says in terms of simplification of communicating and facilitating all the things that need to be done. There are so many exposures to consider, regulations, standards, and governing agencies, that technology can really pull all of those things together to ensure that we are addressing all those things that need to be done and making sure that it's delegated to the right people, and in closing, to document what we've done to address that.
Right. You bring up a good point. I mean, it's one thing to, as Robbie said, kind of, focus on the critical things, but you also have to get those critical things to the team, right? It's how do you stay abreast of the laws, right? Whether they're local or state or federal. As I mentioned before, I mean, NAA can help with a lot of that. And certainly, property managers are used to working with the local affiliates and their local associations to find and grab that information and incorporate it in. Robbie, I'm thinking of, pool drain covers and, those types of things that have occurred, over the last time.
Among many others.
Yeah, I don't even know how. It's funny because I haven't been in operation for the last 6 years, and sometimes I have to ask myself those questions of, what has really changed in that time, and how do I stay abreast of it? And if you think about transition in team members, right? You've got people that are moving from one state to another, right? You can't just assume that the way you managed a property in one state is like it is in another state. And then you leave, and it's like, well, who's picking up where I left off, and where did they leave off? So certainly you have that documentation that's needed, as kind of Jen was referring to. The other thing that I always hear about is the easy integration, right? You think about one more tool. Robbie, if you were to tell your people, hey, listen, I need one more login, you're like, oh, they're going to just shoot you, right? I mean, how many logins can you have for all the systems? Do you see any problems that you all are facing from a login perspective?
It's not so much as a problem as it is. I go back to efficiency. So just the ease of use, the end user being able to have the single sign-on to get on one single app and run everything, because we're constantly evolving with smart home technology, with leak sensors, with HVA diagnostic tools, and each one of those has their own platform. So our maintenance team members already have an abundance of work to do with service requests and move-ins. So once we start, every time we layer in an app, it just gets more difficult. So with that single sign-on API integration between leak sensors and whatever the technology may be, makes it easier for our teams to manage at the as the end goal. Again, we try and keep it simple but effective.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of good points there. I mean, talking about ease of integration, right? Single sign-on, right? The ability to make it easy for your team members to log into the system. And as we mentioned, there is high turnover typically in multifamily. So you think about people that leave the company and go elsewhere, right? And do their accounts stay active? Do they get disassociated with the community? Heck, it's not only if they leave the company, it's if they leave that property, right, and go to another property, and managing that access. So yes, you've got single sign-on, but you also have the consideration of zombie accounts, right? Those accounts that are left open that in the risk mitigation perspective there, could cause you problems down the road because those accounts are active and somebody may still be able to access something. Let's go to the next stage. I'm sure we'll talk more about those topics, but let's talk about ROI, right? That can express itself in many ways. And if you think about actual revenue generation and what we're talking about here, I would say is not necessarily something where kind of, hey, we're going to spend or we're going to do these things, and it's going to result in revenue that we're actually seeing on the property P&L, which I think is something difficult for a lot of people to think like, right? Most people think kind of, if I'm going to spend something, where is it saving me more other money on the expense side of the equation, as opposed to saying, well, how is this actually kind of creating an ROI? Robbie, if you think about some of the things that you've put in place, where is the ROI?
So I hate to use an old timeless cliche, but time is money. So the more efficient our teams can be, the more time that they have on their hands to do other things, which would be focusing on the customer, curb appeal, things of that nature. So, for example, when the pandemic hit, they already had the normal stuff that they had to do with their turnover or make ready units and work orders. But now you later in on top of that, disinfecting of the fitness center, the pools, the grounds, where we start layering in all this extra work. So every minute, every 5 minutes, everything that we can do to save a little bit of time just makes us more efficient. So I'll give you another example. During the pandemic, through our mobile platform, we're able to send out, bulletins and notices to our maintenance teams and communication. And, there's a lot of new protocols and things that we had to develop. But one of those was we educated our maintenance teams on, when you go to do a service request, don't take your entire tool bag into the apartment, because every single one of those tools would have to be disinfected. Understand what the service request is, gather as much information you can, and only take the tools necessary to do the job. And that way, so again, it comes back to efficiency, running back and forth to the shop, things of that nature. I think the technology has given us more ways to get great information so that we can take the parts, the tools necessary to do the service request or the make ready or whatever that may be, and just make us more efficient. So again, time is money. Any time through efficiency that we can save is goes back to the property.
And you mentioned information, right? Documentation, 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 right? The ability to, I know Jen would jump in and say, listen, that's what we need, right? On the insurance side, we need documentation, right? We need historical information. We need kind of everything you can tell us. You can try to prevent all the claims that you can, but those that come through and you have to deal with them, there's certain information that you're going to need.
It's
So
invaluable. Yes.
yeah, that documentation, I mean, it can come in many forms. Robbie, I assume that a lot of your templates and whatnot are demanding certain types of documentation. Can you give us some examples of some of the information that you're requiring of your maintenance team members?
Yeah, like I explained before, doing preventative maintenance, our platform allows us to take pictures, make comments, things of that nature. So if we're doing exterior, preventative maintenance on a HVAC system, we can ask for pictures. We can ask for pictures to make sure the unit's properly labeled. So the technology has advanced so long. And two, I think, we focus a lot and talk about our maintenance teams and everything going on site, but from a senior leadership standpoint, it really gives easy transparency, and I can manage by exception. So I can look at that exterior condenser PM and only look at those points or those inspection points that failed. So that way I'm not looking at all of the data. I'm just looking at specific data that allows me to focus on that and our teams to focus on it. So the technology has come, to Jen's point as far as documentation, but on a senior leadership level, managing on a portfolio wide basis has just got so much easier through the technology.
So let's talk about that, expense reduction. You kind of touch on that there. How are you all either identifying problems before they happen or as soon after they happen as they happen? I know you mentioned kind of leak sensors before. Can you talk about some of the technologies that you all are using to try to, I'll call it, preempt the bigger issues?
Yeah, so we're currently partnering with one of our ownership groups in technology that will predict failures on an HVAC system before they actually happen. So it's actually sitting there collecting all these data points, and it uses algorithms to understand that these are the typical scenarios or criteria that would indicate that it's an overflowing drip pan or it's a clogged air filter. So we're literally predicting what the equipment's going to do before it actually fails, which in turn is a great customer service standpoint, because now we're not waiting for the resident to get home at 5 p.m. and identify that their unit is down. We, through the alerts and the notifications, can understand that there's something going on. I can go look at that unit and save that service call from ever happening. So the technology and the advancement is just it's fast and furious. There's a lot of technology out there, but we are pursuing those avenues because it's great technology. And at the end, we're trying to get our service team members too to get that data, but get it in a simple form that they can understand and react immediately to save on that service call.
Yeah, certainly. You talk about leak sensors. I mean, I know I've got one in my own house, right? I mean, I want to know that if a toilet or a hot water heater is leaking, I want to get to it quick because the amount of damage can just get exponential. And then you got to bring Jen into the picture. We really don't want to do that. Jen, what any other technologies you're seeing out there that kind of help prevent problems before they become too big?
Um, the number of technologies is too long to list over my career over the last 20 years. 10 years ago, I would have said technology is the wave of the future. And now I would say technology is, get on the bus or get left behind. There's lots of different technology that we encounter on the insurance side when working with properties, from water leak detection systems like you guys have mentioned, to mold detection devices, flood detection devices. Everyone is familiar with the long-standing smoke and fire detection devices, gas leak and seismic shutoff valves. Those are all really property centric. But then we also see security cameras being used more and more often for a variety of reasons to, combat crime, and to really, get the details of the situation and use that, as you mentioned, Terry, in claims adjusting. Telematics in vehicles, storm notification systems to let properties know, if a hurricane, even sometimes a wildfire is imminent. And then, of course, the operations, maintenance, and learning management platforms that kind of all pull it together.
Yeah, let's hold that thought on hurricanes and hailstorms and weather and whatnot. We'll talk about expense reduction a little bit deeper when we get to the next slide. Let's not switch yet, though. Robbie, I know you and I have had this conversation in the past about georeferencing, right? And kind of how that is helping your team. Can you talk a little bit about that now that they've got mobility in their hands, and how they might be more effective with georeference technology?
Yeah, so I hate to keep throwing examples out there, but I mean,
Hey, examples are the best source of information for team members.
so you're a new service team member on the team. You're pulling call that week, which means emergency calls in the middle of the night, and you get one at 2 a.m. that there's a building 7 is flooding. Well, the first thing that you're going to do when you show up on site is, back 10 years ago, you had to go typically to the maintenance shop. There was a board up there that had red dots and blue dots showing shut off electricity, where that valve is. So I first had to go to the shop. I had to find out where that shut off was. Then I had to go to the building. Then I had to hunt for it. Now with geofencing, and that technology in the palm of our hands, I can go, even before I get there, I can look and make sure that I know exactly where that shutoff valve is. I can go there immediately. And as Jen can attest to, the more quickly we respond to an emergency, the less damage that there's going to be. So with this technology now in geofencing, I know exactly where shutoff valves are, cutoff valve, and it could be a mid-rise, high-rise, it could be in a hallway in one corner, but it's all in the palm of our hands now, versus he had to go to a central location and look at a physical map.
Definitely makes a difference, right? Time is money.
Absolutely.
Different way there. I want to go back up to actual revenue generation. If you think about it, and Robbie, maybe this goes along the lines of kind of maintenance and their impact on resident satisfaction, because I do think when with some of the things that you all have talked about, right, preventing problems, right, minimizing the impact of problems, helping the team be more efficient so that they, Robbie, you mentioned that they could spend more time, working with residents, interacting with residents, doing some of those things that maybe get put on the back burner because, you are fighting fire as a team member. I think that, certainly resident satisfaction, if you think about it, is an opportunity to reduce vacancy, right? Through lesser turnover, concessions through satisfaction, but also increasing rent. And, we all know that, resident satisfaction are a lot of the primary reasons, why, especially today, we talk about technology, people know that they know what the ratings are of communities before they ever lease, right? Another one of those technologies that they're gaining insight. So the maintenance team members are becoming much more critical. I don't know that they were than they were like many years ago. Robbie, your thoughts on kind of the impact of maintenance?
It's been a huge impact, and I see over the years, we were typically doing the normal routine service requests, make readies, pick up the grounds, and things of that nature, and there wasn't a whole lot of focus on customer service. But now, studies have proven that a resident that is happy is more likely to renew and renew at a higher rate. So, that's why I really like the platform that we use because we can communicate with the resident real time with the shortage on everything now from appliances to, I mean, you name it, the parts are short, it's hard to get. There are going to be those times when we can't meet our service guarantee, whatever that may be, because of that part shortage. But you can communicate with the resident and let them know. And as long as they're informed, I think they're happy. I always revert back to when I work in the hotel industry and the brand. If I went to and checked into a hotel and my remote didn't work, I call down to the front desk. From what happens to that point until it gets fixed determines my brand loyalty. Okay, if they come up in 10 minutes and fix my remote and they apologize about it, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to like that. But if I don't hear anything, I don't get any response, I'm going to question that brand loyalty and maybe think about changing. So you have to now in this day, you have to provide that customer service. That's part of it. So I think our platform allows us to communicate, those times when we can't meet the demands. And I think as long as the resident is informed, they're okay with that. They understand. But the technology is there to communicate and keep that customer service standpoint.
Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit. Good points, Robbie. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit more about expense reductions and actually reducing insurance costs. And, Jen, I get this question asked a lot. It's like, kind of, okay, with all of these programs that are in place, right? The AI that Robbie's talking about, the ability to diagnose problems either before they happen or shortly after they happen and minimize damage. How does that then translate into savings in insurance premiums? And what is it that insurance companies are really looking for?
Well, I think, essentially, if we can't eliminate or substitute a risk, we move to engineering controls or administrative controls. And the type of technology that has evolved over my 20 years of doing risk control is really quite remarkable. Preparedness and prevention are our greatest opportunities to eliminate and minimize risk, and in turn, save on cost of claims and all of the other indirect costs associated with those claims, which may be relocating residents, which may be having personnel who have to replace employees who are out on lost time, those sorts of things. And all of that really translates into what your insurance program looks like in your insurance premiums. So those things are all factored into your loss funds and your loss history. And to the extent that we can focus on preparedness and prevention and leveraging technology, that really translates into reduced loss history and a savings on your insurance premiums.
So Robbie, how much of I'll call it the inspection checklist, and correct me if you think there's a better kind of term for it for your teams working in the field, but how much of that is a result of call it coordination, cooperation, input from senior leadership, right? Saying these are the things that need to get done on properties, right? I know your team is maintaining properties, but here are the other things you need to look at.
Yeah, we use a wide range of inspection points and stuff like that. But I think one of the biggest things that's evolved over the last couple of years is what Jen alluded to is those national disasters, hailstorms, things of that nature, to where we can send out a pre-hurricane checklist or a post-hurricane checklist and be better prepared during those emergency situations. So we can literally put the information in the palm of our hands of our team members to say, okay, I need to go to the pool. I need to lock down my furniture. I need to make sure the umbrellas. So it's kind of walk me through what I need to do to prepare for a hurricane. And then afterwards, we have post hurricane, and we even have assessments. So the benefits of having those, and then again from a senior leadership, we can compile that data and understand what our risk is, and provide that reporting that Jen needs as far as the total loss for that project. So I think the technology is advanced so far. The only piece that we're currently working now with is that integration. So manually, we have to go in and launch, our hurricane preparedness checklist. So we're working with that integration with the National Weather Service so that it takes that off of our hands and just automatically generates it based on weather conditions. So huge advancements when it comes to
Yeah,
that.
that's interesting. A couple things kind of come to mind there. You think about, auto generating a checklist, right? A pre-hurricane checklist. Obviously, you're trying to minimize damage. Jen, he's obviously trying to help you in your world, prevent kind of all of those items, and then a post checklist. But the integration, you mentioned integration with the National Weather Service, key point, because I heard somebody mention this long ago, Jen, and you may be familiar with this, right? You think about hailstorms, right? Roof damage, is another big claim. And I'm curious, Jen, to kind of get your thoughts on those areas of claims that, either are the biggest dollars or the most common, in that, you just want to kind of knock yourself upside the head and say, well, geez, if they would have only done this, they could have avoided, the payment of these types of claims, I think of hailstorms, right? Hailstorms are so micro level, right? It could hail in my neighborhood, but it might not hail next neighborhood over. And if you think about not having a team member, that lives on site, right, who didn't know that it hailed, right, the next morning, how do you know to really check the roofs and see if there was any damage? Because otherwise you may find out about it 2 years later, right, when you go to sell the property, and all of a sudden the buyer wants to, assess a deduct on the purchase price because, the roofs need to be replaced.
Worst case scenario, right? I agree. That's the beauty of these checklists. There are those things that we're accustomed to managing on a day-to-day basis, and we're very well versed at those. But for those things that may be, a once a year occurrence or not very regularly, to have those checklists kind of built out really helps facilitate and streamline that process and minimize the amount of time where we're trying to figure out who's doing what and what it is that they need to do. So that's a great use of those checklists. And also, to Robbie's point, the beauty of the checklist is that we can build those out specifically based upon maybe some risks that are unique to certain territories or geographies. So, living in Denver, I am in Hale Alley. And, that's something that we have to consider, whereas maybe other parts of the country, that's not as much of a concern. So that would be an appropriate checklist for us to build out for our folks here, and may not apply to properties in other parts of the country.
Well, or you think about preparation for the unexpected, right? I mean, I live in Texas, and the winter storm that we had last year that, sometimes had properties losing power for an entire week. And Robbie, you think about that brand loyalty comment that you made earlier, right? If I'm at a property that lost power for a week, and I've never, and my on-site team has never communicated with me as a resident about what to do, they're like, well, of course, dummy, what would you expect to do? The power's out, go somewhere else, right? That's kind of an unacceptable answer. But you think about all the pipe freezes and everything else, and something that maybe is unexpected, maybe the teams were ill prepared for, but companies in general, and Jen, I want to talk about kind of the without naming companies, talk about what makes an effective organization at planning these types of things, right? And maybe who doesn't, because you need to be prepared for the unexpected, certainly. And you mentioned kind of different property types and whatnot, different company sizes, right? It's one thing if you've got, Robbie, I'm sure you have a director of risk management, right? And somebody, in legal, and there's probably a team associated with that. But, there are a lot of management companies out there that don't have those resources, right? It's a couple regional managers, leadership, and you've got kind of a smaller back office support who may not be skilled in a lot of these areas. Jen, what are you seeing out there, in these different types of organizations, and what should they be focused on? And what if I'm a small company and I just don't have those resources?
I think many businesses now recognize that the old adage, "It will never happen to us," no longer applies after the pandemic, which has applied to all of us. So, being a safety professional, preparedness is my favorite topic because there's a lot of opportunity to prepare for the risks that we're aware of, and there's an opportunity to prepare for risks that may not be as likely, but that we can position ourselves to respond to effectively. So I think what I see in terms of organizations that respond well in these kind of situations is a commitment on the part of senior management to risk management initiatives and efforts, dedicating resources and personnel to those initiatives, and really effective communication between the different functions and the different departments. And technology is really a great way to tie all of that together.
Yeah, if you think about those maybe that don't have the resources, I know most of the listeners here, probably realize that this is a close-knit industry, right? I mean, if you need help, if you need guidance, if you have questions, that there's always somebody out there who's willing to help, whether that's through the National Apartment Association or certainly your local association. There are places you can go to get all that information. I'd encourage team members to do that and even prepare for the unexpected, right? Yeah, the things that you have to do regularly, but what is it that may come up, right? Some of us ignore certain things like, I don't know, I use active shooter as an example, right? It's something you think is never going to happen to you until it happens to you. You're right, Jen, in that some of these things it's not a matter of kind of whether they'll happen, it's just a matter of when they will happen, right?
And frankly, over the years, the risks and exposures that we are trying to mitigate and manage have changed so significantly from the typical, fires and slips and falls to things that I really never would have expected us to be dealing with in loss prevention, crime related situations, civil unrest, pandemics, natural disasters on a regular basis. So you are right, Terry. There are a lot of resources available, particularly maybe for those smaller businesses that don't have, some of the technology at their fingertips. And I would recommend reaching out. Everybody has an insurance carrier. Insurance carriers really like to partner with their clients to help them manage that risk, and their insurance brokers as well.
You mentioned cameras earlier. It's interesting. I've seen a lot of evolving technology now on the use of cameras to detect, illicit behavior, right, and try to prevent, those issues from escalating a lot further, right? Whether it's audio, directly from the cameras because somebody's monitored and sees something, that's occurred, or like the leak sensor, right? It's an automatic notification that, hey, there's an incident. Somebody needs to do something, right? In the absence of that technology, and if you do nothing, well, then nothing's going to happen, right? That incident's going to occur, and you could be on the hook for the potential liabilities that result from that. I think that's a good point, Jen, on the cameras. And I would encourage all folks out there to check the cameras. I say that it sounds so simple, right? Yeah, my cameras are working. Well, a lot of times, the only time the cameras are working is if there's an incident and you go to try to find the recording and you go back and look, right? And then you may or may not have had a camera that was inoperable. So certainly worth a look-see. The other thing, we talk about a complicated world. now with assets getting more complex, and you think about, and Robbie, I'll address this to you. If you think about some of the more complex mechanical systems that are out there, right? You think about the risk of people getting hurt, right? Trying to work on things maybe that they aren't skilled to do and whatnot. Do you see a lot of risks in that regard? And, Jen, that brings the whole kind of, whether it's work comp or, personal injury kind of into this. Can you all touch on anything related to that area?
So, of course, in the maintenance field, there's always that risk, and safety is always priority in my opinion. But it comes down to training and awareness, around that. Get it early. But one thing too, when we relate it to technology, is we use that technology to put resources within service requests. So whether it's responding to a microbial issue or whatever that may be, we provide a resource that while they're in the field responding to that type of service request, they can view a resource and say, oh, okay, this is what, the policy is, or this is the procedure, or this is what so we're expanding on that, to provide more resources on demand, as it relates to a specific type of service request or task. So that is where technology's really come a long way, is being able to provide that on demand quickly, and short resources.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, education is key, right? Not every company does things the same way. And you can't always assume that, if I'm an on-site team member, right, and I've joined a company, that I do things here just like I did at my last job, right, or my last property. So certainly that education kind of at your fingertips is a great resource. The other
Something
thing
that I love, oh, sorry, Terry.
No, go
Something
ahead.
that I love seeing when I visit with our insureds, when we've data mined the information that we have on claims and other trends, and we can really flesh out some of those areas where we see risk and exposure, we can develop protocols around those. For example, moving heavy appliances. And we may be able to outline a step-by-step best practice process that we want the employees to use and integrate into that training that Robbie is talking about. And that ensures that everybody understands what the expected protocol is, that it's been well communicated and trained out, but also it demonstrates that documentation piece that we always talk about, which sometimes is challenging when we're talking about compliance, whether it be with, OSHA or any other sort of regulatory agency or your insurance company. Being able to demonstrate that process that you have and that you've trained the employees on it, and you have it at your fingertips documented in your platform.
Yeah, and you talk about employees, and team members with kind of the skills to kind of get the job done, right? That brings up the thought of, well, not every team member is skilled enough to do certain types of jobs, and certainly with technology today, you think about task assignment, right? Or work order assignment, right? How do I get that in the hands of the right person? If you think about, I'll call it the old days of, right, printed paper service requests, right? I take them and I hand them out, and hopefully I'm handing them to somebody who is actually capable of getting that work order done. But nowadays, with certifications and the requirements in, you want to make sure that the person doing the work is actually skilled or has the certifications to it, right? That the system and the technology can actually assign those tasks directly to the appropriate individual, right? And then maybe leave it to somebody to take it out of their hands and do elsewhere, but at least you've got it in the right hands in the first place. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. If we could go to the next slide. So Jen, I guess I would kind of sum it up and say, we've talked about expense reduction, right, or savings. There was a quote you mentioned at one point. I forget exactly how it goes, but I thought that was really a great idea, or a great thought. How did that go? Jen, I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Sorry about that.
Oh.
I think it was return on investment is tricky in safety and loss prevention because you can't measure what doesn't happen. So we certainly spend a lot of time in the insurance industry measuring what does happen and the result of those sorts of things that we'll have on premiums and loss funds and how the insurance program is structured.
Well, let's face it, right? I mean, premiums are set by loss history, right? At
Right.
an organization or a site. So certainly, mitigating those expenses, right? Not incurring, what is it you said, the cost of something that never happened.
Right. It's hard to measure.
It is. That is extremely hard to measure. But organizations, and I've heard this repeatedly from those who have talked with, their insurance brokers, carriers of, that if you're implementing a lot of the stuff that we've just talked about, that there are savings in your premiums. I assume you can validate that is correct, Jen. Is that true?
Yes, it certainly demonstrates that organizations are committed to mitigating their risk. We know that everybody has some kind of risk, and it's really all about how you manage it. So to your point about insurance premiums and programs being based on lost history, that's a big piece of it. There are some other factors that are taken into consideration, but as many people have probably experienced over the last several years with our hard insurance market, having an unfavorable loss history can especially work against you. And so I always encourage my clients to really manage those things that are in their control, because we're going to encounter many things that are out of our control, like we've mentioned already, pandemics and hurricanes.
Right.
And that really reflects more favorably on your loss history when you're managing what you can control.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can talk about, but until you actually do it and realize the results, right? At that point, it's just a pipe dream, I guess. So it may take a year or two, but certainly loss history and minimizing those losses is critical. So let's talk about kind of our key takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So first, engage technology that improves efficiency and accuracy through standardized, streamlined processes and workflow management. If you haven't implemented any type of technology, I would highly encourage you to do that. And technology should facilitate dialogue among associates and between associates and residents. So key here, right? It's not just between associates and residents. Certainly that's a key piece of it, but facilitating communication between your own team members, right? Whether that's your maintenance team and your property manager, or your maintenance team with other members of the maintenance team, or your on-site team with corporate. All of that communication can be facilitated through technology, and make sure that you capitalize on that. And then third, that lower insurance premiums through risk mitigation and the implementation of tools that enhance inspections, preventive maintenance, communications, and visibility into those processes. As we said, it may take a little time, but no better time to start than the present. And if we go to the next slide, James, feel free at any time. We're going to open it up for questions, and we're happy to stay and address any thoughts and comments that you may have, but you can also connect with us, with each of us on LinkedIn at any time. As I mentioned, it's a friendly industry, so feel free to use the resources and those who have had experience in the industry to help you address the problems that you may have to face. And James, I'll turn it back to you.
Terrific, Terry, and terrific, Robbie, Jen, terrific presentation all around. So if you have questions for our three presenters, you are most welcome to type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, preferably, or the chat box if you wish. And I'll read them aloud, and Terry and his team will answer them aloud. So it looks like we've got one question from Alexandra. Alexander would be interested to hear about how insurance companies vet any partner that an operator uses.
Thanks for the question, Alexandra. I would say that we are really not in the business of vetting the partners. We are in the business of partnering with our clients and insureds to help them vet partners that are the best fit for them. So we certainly, have vendors that we are familiar with, and we typically try to, recommend a handful of those. But more than anything for us, it's helping the client understand, what their exposures are, how that technology can best be used, and ultimately what they need, the outcome that they need from using that sort of technology.
Yeah, I know. I guess I'll also add that I know time is short for a lot of people. And, property management is about juggling a million balls. But, in this area and others, make sure that that you look at all the alternatives out there, right? And the options and investigate them thoroughly. There are a lot of, regardless of, I talk about proptech and all the things that have occurred over the last few years. There are a lot of emerging technologies. Some groups are going faster than others, certainly, and the industry's changing rapidly. So make sure that you do a thorough analysis of the technology that you use.
I agree. And don't be afraid to ask the questions, partner with your risk management professional, whether that's in your organization or if it's an insurance carrier, insurance broker, especially if you don't know where to start, but you have kind of an idea of what your exposure is and how you'd like to manage it. We can certainly help point you in the right direction.
And just like you would when you're hiring individuals for your team members, right? And you ask for references, do the same thing from technology.
Exactly.
Well, Jordan has a question for Robbie. Is your team using an app, and how long have you been using it?
That's a great question. So the app is just a piece of it. We're on a complete total maintenance platform solutions. The app is just one piece of that. So we've been on this platform for almost 4 years, and I've seen it evolve over the 4 years. It's a great platform, and we continue to grow with it and expand on it. But again, the app is just one small piece of that. It's a total maintenance solutions platform is what we're on.
Hey, Robbie, if you think about the app, right, and part of that relates to a mobile device.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you want to address for just a second on the acceptance of mobility in the field by your team members.
Yeah, so when we first adopted the platform, I mean, even 4 years ago, if you think about it, we even had some of our service team members on flip phones, and you're thinking, "Wow, flip phones has been gone forever," but we actually had some. So there's always some hesitation about, okay, how well are they going to adapt to it? Are they going to, how user friendly is it? But I would tell you the platform that we use is fantastic. They got rid of the flip phones, no questions asked, and the adoption rate was just unbelievable. It was a great response, and we rely on the feedback from our team out in the field to make that platform better. You know, we consistently talk between focus groups and things of that nature to say, how can we make it better? What are some of the roadblocks, and how do we eliminate those? So, getting feedback from our team members, the adoption rate was great, fantastic, and they continue to grow. And even now, after 4 years in, it's kind of like, have we ever not used something like this in the past? Talking about earlier about using service requests in triplicate. I think about Florida and the rain. You take a batch of service requests out and go to your golf cart, and it's just a jumbled mess, and everything's gone. Now with technology, we can house all that information. It's there. We can look at trends, data, gather feedback. It's just phenomenal. I just love the technology.
I think you might get some more follow-up questions with that on LinkedIn, Robbie.
All right.
Well, terrific. Any more questions? Time for one more. Well, if not, we'll give it a few minutes. But if not, Terry and his team have graciously offered to have you connect with them via LinkedIn. You're always welcome to use LinkedIn's messaging app to query them directly. All right, I think we're good here. So again, I want to thank our three presenters for a really outstanding webinar, tremendous pragmatic, practical application that should bear tremendous dividends for all participants. So, for additional resources, NAA maintains an online portal for its many offerings and operations solutions to the rental housing industry. The URL is featured below on the screen. I especially wish to highlight NAA Anonymous Mental Health Survey. We've partnered with researcher Swift Bunny to conduct a first of its kind national survey for the rental housing industry on employee mental and emotional health. Our first survey ran in late 2021 and was so successful that we will be rerunning it again from March 14th to April 15th this year. Please visit this webpage for how your organization can participate. And while you're there, you can also read the white paper and view the webinar, both of which detail the very important findings from last year's survey. Finally, if you've enjoyed today's webinar and would like to view more, you can always visit our YouTube channel for those many NAA webinars that are now viewable on demand. The URL is featured below. Again, I wish to thank everyone for participating. Thank you to Terry, Robbie, and Jen, and thank you to our audience. We value your membership and appreciate your attendance. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, James.
Thank you all for your
Thank you,
partnership.
NAA.
Thank you.